I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
Welcome to the Red Pill Roundtable with Stevie Scorpio. All right, welcome to the Red Pill Roundtable. It is 12:04, August 26th. That was the countdown. For some reason, I can't see the guy's name. But great song. What a great intro. Great way to start the show. How's your day going today, Scorpio?
Mr. Stephen Crawford, I am doing well. I'm looking forward to our interview today, and this will be good.
It should be fun. Today we have, from the UK, who's written a book called Without Consent. It is Philip Mantle, and he co-wrote this book with Carl Negatis, and this is an update of a book they did in the 90s. Is that right, Philip?
Yeah, good evening. Yes, it is. It's a revised edition. Carl and I first put it together in 1994, but obviously a lot's happened since then, and a lot of new people have joined the subject. So during the lockdown, I thought, here's such a better time than to put it together again.
Oh, great. And that's the one thing that was positive about the lockdown. It gave a lot of people a time to catch up on things they hadn't done in a while. Anything they could do on their own, that is. And like you, let's do a new book, update something we've already done, add some cool news stories to it, and bam. That is fantastic. And when was it exactly did you guys first decide to get together on the original book? When was that, and what?
Well, yeah, I mean, I met Carl. Carl was a well-established, Fleet Street journalist in the 1990s, in the early 90s. Worked for most of the large newspapers here in the UK. Was a feature writer, and that's how I met him. We did a couple of features on UFOs when he was at one of these particular newspapers, and then he left. And he set up his own public relations company. And one of Carl's clients was a TV production company in London. And they said, we're thinking about making a documentary about alien abductions. You don't happen to know anybody, do you? And he says, I know just the man. So, we worked on this documentary together. At the end of the day, it never came off for whatever reason. They didn't go ahead with it. But I said to Carl, it's a shame. We've done the research. It'd make a good book. And he just said, well, it just so happens one of my other clients is a book publisher, this time not in London, in the north of England, in Cheshire. And I said, okay, well, ask them if they're interested. And if they are, we'll write the book together. They said, yes, please. We wrote the book. And Carl interviewed a number of the people featured in the book. I literally drove from one end of the UK to the other, interviewing as many people as I could. And Without Consent was born in 1994. That's how it all came about.
That's fantastic. And can you give the audience a brief history about yourself and when you became... it was Bufora you were with first, the British UFO?
Well, I was always interested in all things paranormal as a young man. After leaving high school, not knowing what to do, I went from one job to another, no formal education, no qualifications. But I still had this interest in the paranormal, and UFOs, came to the fore in late 1978 into early 1979. I worked in what was West Germany for a short while, and not being able to speak or read or write the language, my mum sent me a parcel of books, and they were all about UFOs. I think she'd bought them on a local market somewhere. So that just, confirmed my interest. And when I came home, my aunt, who lived round the corner, we used to live about 5 miles from the city of Leeds in West Yorkshire in the north of England. And we had a local evening paper. And in that paper, the newspaper, was an advert for the Yorkshire UFO Society, their first meeting that coming Sunday. So off I went on the bus, didn't drive in those days, found the location, and that was me, coming home kind of feeling, Stephen, And at the same time, I joined the British UFO Research Association, and I was up and running. The Yorkshire UFO Society was formed by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. Many years later, Graham went on to edit and publish a highly successful magazine, simply called UFO Magazine, was published on the newsstands here. And I think at its height, it sold 40,000 copies a time, which was very good. And, I was up and running, and that's how I dipped my toe into UFO research.
And Philip, this is Dave Scorpio. I just wanted to ask you, have you postulated, what are the main agendas behind the UFO phenomenon in terms of your research and your experience? What have you come to in terms of the big picture as of right now?
Well, if there is such a thing, my ideas are that the big picture is much bigger and much more complex than we can imagine. One of the things we tried to do in the book Without Consent was to look to see if we could find any patterns. Was there any locations that were more prevalent, any age groups, any gender, income, you name it, but we couldn't. What seemed to us that whatever these encounters may or may not be, they just happen to everyday members of the public, just like you and me, when they were about their daily tasks, taking the dog for a walk, driving to your girlfriend's, whatever. One of which is probably the best known case in the UK, was a serving police officer actually on duty in his patrol car at the time of the incident. And the last thing on his mind that morning, he'd just finishing his night shift. It's a chap called Police Constable Alan Godfrey. He'd been looking for some missing cows, believe it or not. So UFOs were not certainly on his mind. He was only, 15 or 20 minutes from finishing the end of his night shift when this incident happened to him, completely out of the blue.
Certainly he made a remark. So, why couldn't this have happened to the guy who was going to replace me?
Well, exactly. The Alien Abduction Club is probably the only club that nobody wants to join. It's that kind of thing. And of course, PC Alan Godfrey, being an honest Joe, he actually went and reported the incident, and then he had to write an official report that was sent to the Ministry of Defence, and it backfired on him. Alan had to come out with the police force a couple of years later. But he was just an honest chap about his everyday task. His job just happened to be a policeman. And he had no interest and no idea what had happened to him. So I think, when it comes to the bigger picture, even when you speak to the individuals who've had these experiences, they're as confused as the rest of us. And just when you think you might be onto something, you think, I think I might have found something here, then the phenomenon has this way of giving you a kick in the teeth, and you're saying, I'm sorry, you were wrong, and away you go again.
Yeah, nice try, buddy.
Nice try, but
that
no
really
cigar.
is true. That really is true about ufology in general, just how many turns and twists there are. And as soon as you learn something, you learn, well, maybe that wasn't true. And The other problem with ufology is there's a lot of, it is ripe with hoaxes and disinformation as well. So it seems to be part of the whole process to make things difficult to comprehend for us in terms of understanding the phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, in 1979, obviously no such thing as the internet. So to become involved, you had to physically do something. You had to go and join a UFO group. You had to read the books and the magazines and newsletters. We used to print our own little newsletter on a hand-cranked machine, this little thing churning them out. So you had to really get involved. I mean, it didn't stop hoaxing or anything like that, but I think what it did, it reduced it enormously. I mean, today, since the internet, everybody's an expert. You just make your own page on social media or build your own website, and there's millions of them. And of course, the technology is there where you can fake a photograph in 10 minutes if you know what you're doing. And I was speaking to a colleague recently, and I again, during my downtime, I've actually written 2 new books as well as this one. And one of them is called Introducing UFOs, and it's called A Young Person's Guide. So it's meant for like a teenage audience if they're thinking about getting involved in the subject. And I wanted to put a photographic section in the middle of the book, So I contacted a colleague who I know has been involved for a long time. I said, have you got anything you could recommend? He says, no, Philip. He said, any photograph now I won't have, or film, I won't have anything to do with it because the technology is so good that it's almost impossible to sort out the wheat from the chaff. So, in a lot of ways, things have got easier, with the digital technology and the net. But in other instances, it makes the job that much harder as well.
Right. I can imagine. What percentage would you say that you've encountered so far that you found to be hoax?
It's difficult. I mean, hoaxes come in many guises, guys. And they have many reasons for doing it. Some is just pure devilment. They want to get one over on the UFO researchers and make you look stupid. Yeah. That happens. Others do it accidentally. It was a bit of fun that perhaps gets out of control, and they didn't really mean to be a hoax. And then, of course, I hate to be sounding like I'm just plugging things, but I have another book out at the moment, which is called Roswell Alien Autopsy. Again, a revised edition, but it's about the alien autopsy film released in 1995. It's the 25th anniversary of that this coming Friday. And, of course, it was a hoax. But that was a hoax made to make money. And the gentleman behind it, a chap called Ray Santilli and his business partner, Gary Shoefield, made a ton of money out of it. It went out on Fox television in the States and it went around the world. So it's difficult to say what percentage is hoaxes. We can only say, bearing in mind, gentlemen, there will be a number of hoaxes that are still within the realms of, UFO research that are being passed off as genuine, that we don't know that are hoaxes as yet. And some of those may turn out to come up and bite us on the bum at some point. But, I remember back in the 1980s in a place in South Yorkshire a town called Barnsley. A gentleman there, was in his local newspaper, and he said he'd been fishing overnight, and there was this noise early morning. He thought it was a fly on the window, and he woke up to swat this fly. He says it wasn't a fly; it was a UFO going over the houses opposite, and his camera and what have you was still there from his fishing trip, and he grabbed it and clicked away, and somehow the photos ended up in his local newspaper, which was called the Barnsley Chronicle. What a great name, eh? And, it then got out of hand. A well-known UFO author in the UK then got on board, confirming it was genuine. It ended up in the national news media here, and he got, a nice fee for it. But we got hold of it, and we had it analysed by computer, and it was a fake. But again, see, this was just something that happened and got out of hand. I don't think the gentleman behind it ever meant, but obviously if somebody says, I think it's authentic, I'm going to pay you, a couple of $1,000s to let us run it in our newspaper, it wasn't going to turn it down. So,
right.
So there you go. That's just that's how hoaxing happens. It's done for a number of reasons.
Philip,
go ahead, Dave.
What are your thoughts on the Billy Meyer case? Because that's a very controversial case. Some people have claimed, the photographs have all been tested by a computer, they're all real. And other people say, no, they're not, and they're actually easily faked. What's your take on Billy Meyer?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think they are fake. One of those that studied the photos and film, because there is movie film as well, of course, is Dr. Bruce Maccabee.
Right, he was on my show last month.
Yeah, he's been involved in this side of thing for many, many years. He's a physicist, ex-US Navy. And, Bruce is a pro-UFO guy. He believes in UFOs. So he has no reason to debunk anything. He's not a debunker. And as far as he's concerned, and I've read some of his work on it, these photographs and the film are a fake. And, people have actually infiltrated, Billy Meyer's home and befriended him and have got to know him behind the scenes and then have exposed it being a fake. I mean, he reckoned to have a time machine, gentlemen, and take pictures of dinosaurs when they were just photographs from a movie on the TV screen. It's a simple.
Yeah, the photographs of some Jazzy were from a television show, and that's been pretty well documented. Yeah.
Yeah. So
there are serious problems with the narrative, and it's really good to have discernment because. A lot of, I was a believer in the Billy Meyer photographs back in the 1990s when I first saw the Brett Elder's book, the big coffee table book with the photographs, and they were impressive. But as time has gone on, there's been more and more evidence to just at least cast a shadow of a doubt on the whole narrative there.
Yeah, and even with close encounters like we've covered in Without Consent, there is no way when you're speaking to these people that you can positively, put them under the scrutiny to prove that some of them may be hoaxing it. I haven't come across any, but I know there have been some. I know there was one lady, for example, I can't remember her name, but she claimed to be an abductee, and she went to see the late Dr. John Mack and told her story and whatever, and John, naturally believed her. And then she went, I've made it all up. Well, any of us can make it up. Yeah. It doesn't mean that all of them are made up.
That's true, yeah.
Quite the opposite, like I mentioned, Police Constable Alan Godfrey, he ended up costing him his job, So if he was making it up, well, it backfired on him drastically. But I've met Alan a number of times, and he was the kind of police officer you really didn't want to mess with, gentlemen. The old-fashioned type of copper. He had commendations for his police work. And, he was a no-nonsense, down-to-earth chap. And he said, Philip, if I'd have had a brick, I could have thrown it at that thing and it would have gone clunk. It was blocking the road in front of him. And he was in his patrol car. So there you go.
That's one of the stories in your book?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just elaborate. Police Constable Godfrey worked in a town called Todmorden. It's in West Yorkshire. It's got hills all around. It's just a little small market town. And like I said, it had been raining during the night, and Alan was looking for some missing cows. So he's just finishing his night shift. He'd seen an officer on foot patrol in the town. And he said, I'm going to take one last look for these cows, and then that's me done. So he's driving up the main road through the town. Up ahead, he sees a light. And as he gets closer, he realizes it's not a light. It's actually an object that's blocking the road. And it's shaped like an old-fashioned children's spinning top. It's got a bank of windows or dark panels across the top, and the bottom half is spinning. And it's just, above the road. It's almost actually on the road. You can see debris on the road spinning underneath it, bits of twigs and grass and paper or whatever.
Right.
So Alan stops the patrol car, tries his radio to get through to the police station. It didn't work. So he took out his notebook and he started to draw this thing. The next thing he remembers, he's several hundred yards down the road. No idea of, starting the police car. He turned around, and where this object had been, bear in mind it had been raining during the night, the tarmac on the road was actually dry. So he got back to the police station. He was 20 minutes or so late. Couldn't figure out why that was. His police boot was split, and he also had a small burn on the instep of his ankle. No idea how that had happened. So he reported the incident. The following night, he was asked to make an official report. He wrote that down. But Alan was bothered about this missing time aspect. It plagued him a little bit.
Right.
So eventually, he worked with a solicitor in Manchester who was also a UFO researcher by the name of Harry Harris. Harry employed 2 professional psychiatrists who put Alan under hypnotic regression. And they did 3 hypnosis sessions with him. And at the end of each, Alan was not allowed to remember what had happened. What they did with the sessions, they actually videotaped them. So at the end of this, they invited Alan along to see himself on videotape and obviously remember what had happened then. So what you see, I'm one of the few people that's seen the videotape. Alan, he sat in the patrol car and he throws his hands up across his face and he yells, "There's a light, there's a light, there's a light." And then he talks about being on board this thing. He sees 2 different types of beings. One that you would pretty much describe as human. A small man with a little white beard and a skull cap on. And then there's these ugly creatures. Alan kind of recoils when he sees them. Said they had a head that was shaped like an old-fashioned light bulb, And they make him get on this table. And again, he just comes out with it. He said, "How did you do that?" So the hypnotist says to him, "What do you mean?" And he actually hears them talking in his head. They're not moving their lips, but he can hear them. So what I did for the update, the revised edition of Without Consent, of course, is I actually have a transcript of Alan's hypnosis session. So yes, I've retold the case, but I then put the transcript in so everybody can read word for word what was said to Alan and what his reply was to those that put him under hypnosis. And it's fascinating. It really is.
Wow, that's interesting. Very few people have had the opportunity to see a craft that close. What description did he give of the material, of the shell of the craft, or any details about it that he remembers? And does he remember any kind of sound or vibration coming from the craft?
No, not a sound at all. And he was very close to it. It was like he said, he was that close. He said, I could have hit it if I'd had a brick in my hand. You have to remember, gentlemen, our policemen don't, even now, and they certainly didn't then. This was November 1980. Don't carry firearms or anything like that.
Right.
And so he had nothing apart from his truncheon. All the police then and still do have a truncheon. That was of no use to him whatsoever. And it was just this dark thing. There were these dark panels or windows across the top, and the bottom half was rotating. And he said, Philip, I could have hit it and it would have gone clunk, And he is the type of gentleman that is so down to earth. And he's never changed his story. And like I said, it would be the type of police officer, if you were committing a small misdemeanor, he'd say, "Get off home and don't be so silly,"
So certainly his character is the opposite of someone who would just make up a fanciful story. Did he recall seeing any kind of windows, or was it a completely seamless thing? Or you said there was panels, so does that indicate there was pieces to it?
Yeah, I mean, this was a view from the outside. They said it looked like dark panels or dark windows. and the bottom part was spinning. And like I said, he could even see the debris underneath it. Bits of paper and twigs and what have you. What is interesting as a little side issue, the cows were actually found that night, and they were in a park, but the park gates were locked. And Alan could never figure out how the cows got into. He didn't find them. Somebody else did.
Totally forgotten about the cows.
Yeah, how did the cows get into that park?
Wow.
And he just, make of it what you will. It's probably not related at all. I mean, there may well be a totally rational explanation, but Alan said, I don't know how they got in. The gates were locked,
That'd be quite the coincidence.
Yeah. So, and people have made little pilgrimages to Todmorden just to see the area for themselves. It's a nothing place. It's only a small town. I used to drive through it regularly. I used to have a friend over that way, and you just drive past the mill. There's nothing there to be seen. Nothing then and nothing now. And, Alan is as puzzled by it today as he was then back in 1980.
Well, that's an interesting thing about the detail of the craft because, first of all, it's interesting that he saw, debris underneath the craft. That makes sense, and it's not the kind of a detail you'd really make up very easily. And, some UFO contactees have reported seeing a craft that was seamless, as though it was poured into a mold or something like that. There was no seams or marks on it anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. I mean, Alan talks about under hypnosis. Not so much about the craft, but about these two different beings that he sees. Because, first of all, he's blinded by this flash of light, and he literally throws his hands up his arms across his face. Right. And it's a light. And there's at times in it he gets a bit agitated. And then he sees this small man. And the man's even called Joseph. And then he recoils and he goes, ugh. And they ask him, what's the matter? And he says, it's them. What's them? Them ugly things. And and it's these other creatures. And they say to him, what's happening now? He says, they want me to get on the bed, but I'm not getting on. And they said, well, okay, what are you doing? He says, I'm getting on the bed. And then he just comes out with it, and he just said, how do you do that? And no, when you're listening to this, you've no idea what he's talking about. So they ask him and say, what do you mean, Alan? And he said, they were talking, but their lips didn't move. And I could just hear it in my head. And, on the video, you can see the expression on his face. Sadly, that, you can only put so much of that, onto a transcript. Right. But the transcript is better than nothing at all. And like I said, there were two professional psychiatrists who were hired to do this. They weren't some kind of, stage hypnotist or anything like that. And their full names are used, there was no hiding behind anything. So make of it what you will. But, again, just so happens that Alan was a police officer, and that's his job. And he's going about his job that he'd done, similar things many times over. And this type of thing happened, just like the rest of those featured in Without Consent. They're about their everyday tasks. And then, bang, these things happen, your opinion of why and who and what is open just as mine is.
My incident was, I'm not going to get fully into it, but my incident, I was just hitchhiking to another city to visit my girlfriend. And it's about 3 hours missing time, and I was dropped in front of the city I was walking to.
Well, what might be of interest to you, gentlemen? You ask what's the bigger picture. Well, I don't pretend to know the bigger picture. But one of the things we did come across, and we haven't spelt it out, I don't think quite clear enough. Dave, you may be able to answer this as well. But I've called it side effects. A number of the abductees after the event, either became interested in ecological issues or, paranormal stroke spiritual things, or had a talent that they didn't have before, but usually of an artistic nature. I'll give you an example. Another young man I interviewed is a chap called David. He lives on the northwest coast of Wales. It was a place called Pwllheli. Now, David was a young man, with long hair and a denim jacket. I was like that, 10 years before him, no problem. And he'd been to a friend's and he was walking home. It's quite semi-rural, would say, where he lives. And he said, I saw a light in the field up ahead. And he said, part of me felt compelled to take a look, but then the other half is saying, don't bother. Anyway, I went and to take a look. And there's this thing in the field on the ground. It was almost looking a bit like the space shuttle, but with no wheels on it or anything like that.
Right.
This creature approached him from behind. He was actually looking through some bushes into this field. This humanoid put his hand on his shoulder. The next thing he knew, David's on board this thing. He's lying on a slab, a table, we'll call it what you will. On a screen, he can see the planets going past. He doesn't know if this is in real time or it's some kind of film. And this was a time when the Sony Walkman was around, and David had his Sony Walkman on with a cassette in it. And he said these humanoids took the cassette from him and put it in this panel. And he said there's this rock music blaring out from this, in this otherworldly environment. And it completely freaked him. Cutting a long story short, sometime after this, David started to write spontaneous poetry. He'd never been interested in poetry. He liked all the things that a young teenage lad likes, I don't have to spell it out. I'm sure you've been there. And he said,
Same things I was into, yeah.
Yeah, and he said, Philip, I'll be at work. He was working in a local restaurant, and he said, I just have to pick up a napkin or whatever and write this poetry down. And he said, you won't find that mentioned in the book because he wouldn't allow me to say so in case any of his friends found out, And so you have another lady in Northampton, a place called Church Stowe, a lady she's no longer with us, called Elsie Oakenson. After her event, she became a spiritual healer. And Elsie was totally convinced that this, was related to the experience she had driving home that night. John Day in Aveley in Essex, John was with his wife and family in the car when this happened. And almost immediately afterwards, they became interested in what we call green issues today, environmental issues. And again, John says it was a direct result of what he was shown and told and informed about during his encounter. So, I've often wondered if there's others who've had these side effects. We've just never asked the question. Because when you go and speak to someone who's had this kind of experience, you ask the logical questions. What time did it happen? Where was it? What did it look like? Any smells, any noises, and so on. So that's perhaps an area of research that might be taken up by others at some point. It's just curious, it's just a curious thing. I don't know the answer. I just wondered if other people who've had a paranormal encounter, we'll say, I wonder if anything like that's happened to them. I don't know. I'm not sure.
It makes sense, Philip, because a UFO contact like that would certainly sort of blow away your old paradigm of perception and reality. Wow. So it makes sense people would try to seek the infinite and seek the creative and try to seek some answers as to what happened to them on various levels.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's one of those questions I think we just haven't asked enough. We ask, what happened and what did you see, what did you feel? We never really ask about how do you feel afterwards? Did anything change?
Right.
Was your political persuasion changed as a result of this? Was your religion challenged if you had one? All these kind of things. And I had a colleague called Ken Phillips who had a project like this, and it wasn't asking the abductees about what they'd seen. It was asking a whole host of questions about them, and the way they viewed the experience and so on. Sadly, Ken never got the chance to finish the project 'cause he passed away. But it would have been interesting if to see what conclusions he might have come up with.
There's this band, King's X, and the singer, his name escapes me at the moment, but he said when he was a child, he had an experience with a face-to-face meeting with a Nordic. And then he became an amazing singer. Look up the band, check them out on YouTube, King's X. And it's the black guy's the one who's the singer. Just phenomenal bass player, the best, and still incredible. And a lot of the people I know, like I myself got into music pretty much a year after my experience and started writing songs and things like that. And I know a few other people. I won't say their names because they haven't told anybody else, but they claim to have at least seen things, whether it's ghosts or UFOs, and a lot of them became either artists, like painting and drawing, sculptors, or musicians.
Yeah, I find that area absolutely fascinating. It wasn't something we were consciously looking for. Mm-hmm. It was just, we're just chatting with people, chatting with these men and women, and these things came out, and then another one would say something similar, and you're thinking, hang on a minute here, there's probably more of these than is coincidental. Right. That there's something happening here, and I know it's not scientific, and I know it's not 100%, but it's almost a way of. We talked about hoaxes earlier on. It's almost a way of saying, this is a little indication that we're dealing with the genuine article here, whatever the genuine article may be. It's like I said, it doesn't happen to everyone, but it's just intriguing. It's just intriguing. And again, one of the things that we did, like you asked me, was the bigger picture. We asked a number of these abductees because the book deals with abduction accounts and missing time in the UK only, nowhere else. And we asked them, what was the nature and origin of your experience? Well, I mentioned a chap there by the name of John Day. John's account happened in Aveley in Essex in the 1970s. Aveley is about, 40 miles from London. It's just a small, place. It's certainly not in the sticks or anything like that. And John and his wife and children had been to their in-laws that night, and he was driving home, and they encountered a bank of green mist. They went through this green mist, and the radio went a bit wonky. John's wife said the strangest thing. She turned around to him and said, "Are you all here?" Then there was a car bump, and they pulled into the into the village. And in those days, of course, the television, certainly here in England anyway, used to finish at a certain time of night. And John had been wanting to watch something, and when he got in, it was finished, and he couldn't believe it. So they put the children to bed. John was so convinced there's something not right. We used to have the speaking clock. You could bring it up on the telephone. He dialed, got the time, and he still didn't believe it. He actually phoned the local police station just to check the time, And anyway, they remembered their encounter. It all came back to them. I won't go into the details of it, but I said to John, I tracked him down, and I'm interviewing him face to face. And I said, John, was this incident physically real? Was these, beings from wherever? He says, Philip, he says, not only do I not have the words in my vocabulary to explain the nature of these encounters. He said, we as a species, mankind, don't have the words to explain them. And he says, the best way I can explain it to you, and I found this quite profound, gentlemen. He said, if you went to a film studio and you were on set of a movie, you could go up, you could touch it, you could knock it, it would go bang, you could smell it, and it's physically real. But then you look behind it, and it's not, is it? It's an illusion. It's a fake, you know. And he says that's the best way I can explain it to you, you know. And he says we as a species are just not bright enough on the intergalactic evolutionary scale to understand these experiences. But and that, you know, that was, I mean, John was a, you know, an ordinary fella. He was a carpenter, you know, not some kind of professor or or anything like that, you know. And I felt, you know, I don't know what you make of that idea, but that's what he had to say.
My mind right now. I'm trying to wrap my brain around that.
Yeah.
So he's thinking that we're seeing all this stuff in that, but there's something more behind it, and it's not exactly real. Is that essentially it?
Yeah, it's real in a sense that we can't understand it. A bit like, you know, I also run my own one-man book publishing company. It's called Flying Disc Press.
Right.
And the second book I ever published was called UFOs Over Romania by Dr. Dan Farkas, PhD from Romania. And Dan had a theory, his own theory about UFOs, which he calls hypercivilizations. So I asked him to write a book about his theory, which he did. Dan's idea is that, yes, we are being visited by, you know, beings from another world, but they are probably, certainly hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years in advance of us.
Right.
That is why we cannot understand, you know, the phenomenon is there in our face, but we just cannot understand it. For example, he said, if you were to take a television set and put it in an ant's nest or an ant's colony, the ants would know it was there. They'd be able to crawl all over it, you know.
Right.
But they would never in a million years be able to figure out what it was or how to work it, you know.
Well, that's why I think SETI is such a joke. You know,
yes,
radio waves, really? I mean, come on. I was talking to Stanton Friedman about it, too, and he was like, well, yeah, that's a really good question. Why are we still seeking life with radio waves when they're more than likely at least 100,000 years more advanced than us?
Yeah,
and who's to say they even ever developed radio waves? Well,
exactly. I mean, we've been sending radio waves out for what? I don't know, 50, just 100 years maybe. In a short period of time, we'll be no longer sending them. Everything on Earth will be digital.
Right.
So even we will be, you know, radio waves dead as far as the universe is concerned, you know. And but you're right. You know, I and again I've said let's when it comes to SETI, let's say we invent interstellar travel tomorrow. Where would you go? You know, the universe really is that big. Where would you go?
Yeah, and would radio waves be adequate form of communication, you know? No.
Yeah, so, you know, it's as simple as that, you know. So, yeah, I too believe it's a waste of time. But, you know, we'll leave them to it. It's going to continue.
I'd rather see that money go somewhere else into some other research for interdimensional, intradimensional, things like that even. There's so much more out there that I believe has a part in what's going on.
Well, yeah, I mean,
some really scratched yet, you know.
Yeah, I mean, some years back, I got the chance to interview an American physicist called Dr. Michio Kaku, and yeah, he was in the UK promoting a book called Hyperspace, I believe, and I caught up with him in Manchester at his hotel, and he explained, you know, all kinds of things to me, and he said, you know, interdimensional travel is theoretically possible, And he put it in Star Trek terms, so I could understand it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So he says, linear travel, moving from A to B like we do in our cars or in a spaceship. Forget that. You have to be able to bend space and time in order to go across the universe because of the distance and the science, So, but it certainly didn't rule it out. It was a distinct possibility. But nonetheless fascinating. So it could well be that the answer is quite literally within touching distance, but we're just unable to see it at the moment. We're just not clever enough. And a little analogy for you.
Yeah, that's the way that Bob Lazar put it about what the documents he supposedly read, is that the aliens essentially fold time and space, and so you just simply go from point A to point B almost instantaneously. It's not a matter of going X number of millions of miles or anything like that.
Exactly, yes.
Link onto the frequency of the planet or system they want to go to, and then they instantly appear there.
Yeah. Yeah, but so that's it could well be that the technology that is involved or whatever is just there in front of us, but we just can't see it. It's for example, there are animals on this planet that see different light, or animals can hear things in a different pitch to us.
Yeah, different spectrums. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can't. We don't have the ability to see infrared, for example, unless we use goggles, but so it could well be this is another phenomenon that's there within our spectrum, but we're just not able to deal with it at the moment.
Right.
But what was interesting, I think, when I think this is just an example, and I may be wrong, when we've had these so-called videos released from the Department of Defense over the last couple of years. I'm sure there's one of the statements there that said that the way they were able to track them down this time is because they had a new radar system installed. And the new radar was able to do something that the old radar couldn't. I may be mistaken, but perhaps we as a biological entity will have to evolve somewhat or invent some kind of technology to permit us to see what's already in front of our eyes. Who knows?
Very good points there.
Yeah, interesting. Philip, I wanted to go back to Alan's story since you have a transcript of it. Mm-hmm. You said that he saw two beings.
Yes.
How did he describe them in the human being? What was the human wearing?
Yeah, the first one he described as a small man with.
But how small though? Like
we're talking, 5 foot something, an average small guy. He's got a little white beard, white hair. He's wearing a long white gown, and he's got like a little skull cap on, and he's actually given his name. He's called either Joseph or Josip.
Josip. Okay.
Yeah. I've called it Joseph in the book. So he's actually given this being a name. To all intents and purposes, he's human, And then Alan, like I said, he turns and recoils, and he goes, "Ugh." And they ask him what the problem. One thing I forgot as well. I'll come to that in a moment. He sees these other creatures that have heads shaped like an old-fashioned light bulb. We use these energy-saving things now. Remember
they actually did that in like Star Trek too. Right. They had some beings that had heads like that as well.
Yeah, the old filament light bulbs. They said they looked like that. And one thing I forgot to mention, and this is something that crops up in old folklore tales and what have you. Alan saw a black dog.
A black dog.
A black dog
aboard the craft.
Anybody ever mentioned a dog before.
Yes. Yeah, a black dog.
Wow.
Have you heard any accounts?
So none of the beings on this craft were anything to do with the typical description of the gray or anything like that. These are totally different creatures then.
Absolutely. And the black dog. Wow. The black dog crops up in folklore tales. I'll give you an example. my colleague Mark Birdsall and I got a letter from a gentleman who lived in a small village. We have a national park in our county called the Yorkshire Dales National Park. Beautiful part of the world. So we arranged to go and interview him. And we got to this place. And when I say village, it was like 6 or 8 houses. And although we had his letter with us, none of the houses had any numbers on them, you know. So we'd no idea which house he lived in. So we just knocked on the first door and we asked if they could tell us where Mr. whatever his name was at the time. And they said, "Oh, have you come about the black dog, the ghost dog?" No, why? And there was the legend in the village of the ghost dog. The black dog would wander down the village, and all you could see were the 2 red eyes of it, which was just all they were actually seeing was 2 red lights, you know. So the black dog crops up in a number of fields. Another example is our late wartime Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, used to suffer very badly from depression. And he used to call it the black dog. That was his name for his form of depression. So it crops up in a number of places. You have a look in any old folklore, and I guarantee now and again. Well, a black dog will turn up now and again. So Alan Godfrey, not only does he see 2 different beings, he also sees a black dog, which is right. I admit it's all bizarre. But of course, Alan's not the only one to see different types of beings. I mentioned John Day from Aveley in Essex. Again, John saw creatures, beings that looked pretty much like you and I, apart from the fact they had pink eyes. And then on board this UFO, there were also these ugly creatures. They were short and squat, that had the faces that looked pretty much like a bat. And even if you go to the US, you know, we think of Travis Walton. You know, Travis saw 2 different types of beings, one of which was pretty much like you or me, except he had the old-fashioned sort of goldfish bowl helmet on. But they looked pretty much human, you know. And the others weren't exactly the little bug-eyed guys either. They were similar, but they weren't the same. So it's you know, the seeing of different beings is not uncommon. And we have to remember, a lot of people think that the little grey bug-eyed creatures started with Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. Well, if you examine Betty and Barney's account, they didn't see any little bug-eyed creatures like that. The creatures they saw, were almost human looking as far as Betty was concerned. She called them in
a Nazi uniform.
Yeah, they called them the UFO people. Yeah. Yeah, and they wore something like a Nazi uniform. But that's kind of been sort of airbrushed out of UFO history. And I never met Betty. I did correspond with her, and she sent me some photographs of a painting she'd had done. And you know, they were not the little grey guys. So it's not uncommon. But you know, I forgot to mention the black dog. Alan sees a black dog on board the UFO. Make of it what you will.
Right. You know what? And that's perfect timing. We're pretty much at break right now. So anybody listening, make sure you come to freedomslips.com or revolution.radio and donate. We are 100% listener supported. And scroll down, become a patron. We will see you on the other side of the break.